All right, welcome back. For the last talk of the On the Frontier track, we are bringing up two of our Microsoft researchers into here. I'd like to introduce you to Karen and Brian, who are going to talk to us about quantum cryptography and some of the challenges that might bring to us in the security realm. With that, welcome to BlueHat.
Thank you.
Hi. Welcome. Welcome. As you said, my name is Karen.
I'm Brian LaMacchia. How are you?
A stable quantum computer that's capable of breaking today's cryptography is probably about 10 years out. But that computer that doesn't exist yet is a threat to today's information. And this is a problem that we've been working on for 3 or 4 years. There's things that we're doing about this. There's things that we would like you to do something about. And that's what we'll be talking about during this session. But before we start looking forward, we think it's helpful to take a quick look back. So with that, Brian?
All right. Thank you all. As said, Karen and I are the part of the security and cryptography team here at Microsoft Research. And what I'm going to talk about is, after a little bit of history, is the research we've been doing for 3.5 years that is ongoing and that you're now starting to hear about more in public. But I want to start by, in order to look forward, we got to look back, and I want to take us back about 6 years, and in particular to the Flame malware. How many people remember Flame? Yeah, okay, good, okay. So Flame, for those of you who don't remember, was a particularly interesting malware that was discovered and reported to MSRC in 2012. It was targeted at a small set of countries that you can see on the slides, primarily Iran. It was an exfil malware aimed at PDF files, Word docs, and AutoCAD drawings in particular. And it had certain characteristics. There have been reports that it shared certain code with Stuxnet. There have been reports about who might have done it. What was really interesting for us from a cryptography perspective was the way in which it propagated. And it propagated a few different ways. I think there were reported 4 0 days inside of it. But one of the things it did that was particularly unique was it set itself up on a local subnet as a fake Windows update server. And it served out fake Windows security updates to other machines on the local subnet that would pick them up and then install those updates. Now, we protect the Windows Update channel. We digitally sign every update that comes out of Microsoft, and we check for this. And the interesting thing about Flame was that the updates it served cryptographically validated both the signature and the certificate chain up to the Microsoft root. And yet we didn't issue it, okay? Now this is where I come into the story, and I'm going to call out Matt Tomlinson, who I just saw here. Matt was running MSRC at the time, and Matt sends me a mail that says, call me. You never want to get a mail from Matt that just says, call me. And I remember this because I was at a standards meeting in Söderhamn, Sweden, about 2 hours north of Stockholm, and I said to Matt, listen, I'm at this evening event in Sweden. I'm going to be back at the hotel in about an hour or so. Can I call you then? He said, yeah, that's fine. I'm on the US-Canadian border. So I call Matt, and he says, can you accept an S-MIME email and decrypt it right now? And I said, yes, I got all the tools to do that properly. He said, I'm going to send you something. And he sent me a signed DLL. And he said, I want you to look at the signature. I looked at the signature, and I looked at the cert, and I said, it's cryptographically valid. Looks like it chains up to our root. Cert has a couple funny fields in it, but looks okay. He said, yeah, we didn't sign it. Can you tell me what happened? Okay. Now, what's Occam's razor tell you when you get something that's signed that you didn't sign? Someone stole your key. Someone got hold of a machine that had access to the hardware security module that held the key. Somebody compromised a person in a trusted position and bought them to go sign something. None of those are actually what happened. It took us a little while of looking, but after pulling apart the cert and looking at the ASN.1, which I will save you all because ASN.1 is pretty gross, what we found was that the malware authors had carried out an MD5 hash collision attack against the Microsoft PKI, a portion of it that was vulnerable, and they had crafted themselves a certificate for a key they controlled that gave that key code signing authority within our PKI. So what the attacker did, and this was quite innovative, and I have full respect for whatever nation-state level actor might have done this, okay? so let me talk about, MD5 is a cryptographic hash function. Cryptographic hash functions take arbitrary amounts of data and collapse them down to small digests. Okay, in the MD5 case, it was a 128-bit digest. And you're never supposed to be able to generate two messages on your own that hash to the same hash value. That's supposed to be cryptographically impossible, right? It needs to be like 2 to the 128 work or so, and I shouldn't be able to do that. Now, in 2004, at the rump session at the Crypto Conference, which is our annual US academic conference, Xiaoyang Wang of China got up and demonstrated two messages that hashed to the same MD5 hash value. She also did this with MD4, and she did that one with paper and pencil, but MD5 she actually needed a computer to do. So we knew in 2004 that this hash function didn't have the cryptographic property that we assumed it did, okay? And that actually is what triggered, inside of Microsoft, the MD5 removal effort, ultimately the writing of the first version of the crypto SDL, and the foundation of CryptoBoard. All of that really came out of our initial, we have to transition off of MD5, okay? Not all of our PKI did. And a small piece of the PKI that was not centrally controlled, had not moved, and was still using RSA with MD5 signatures, and that's what got attacked. And because of that, the attacker was able to get this cert. Now, we're actually kind of lucky that the malware authors decided to only attack a small part of our customers, because it could have actually been a lot worse, because they had under their control a key that had unlimited authority within the Microsoft PKI. Now, we've taken a lot of steps since then. Of course, we immediately revoked that part of the cert chain. We've locked down Windows Update a lot more tightly. You can't do that these days. But the PKI hadn't transitioned over time. And my point in bringing this up is it was an example of where we have to respect the fact that cryptographic algorithms naturally age, decay, and break over time. This is a chart I put together showing the 4 algorithm transitions that I have worked on here in the 20+ years I've been at Microsoft, starting with the transition off of MD5 in blue. And the vertical scale is sort of my relative feeling about things. That is not, don't take the vertical measurement so much, but the time scale is where we saw events for each of these algorithms where something happened either in the cryptographic algorithm community, in the research community, that caused us to lose some confidence in the algorithm, or some external event happened. So Xiaoyang Wang's MD5 collision caused us to lose a lot of confidence in MD5. Now, it didn't tell us that every single use of MD5 was bad. We were able to reach that point later. But it was the first signal, and we started decreasing and moving to SHA-1, which was the purple line. But we knew even in 2005 that SHA-1 did not have the brute force strength that we thought it did. We started seeing attacks that were better than brute force against SHA-1. And we knew we were going to have to move off of SHA-1. We actually didn't get a collision on SHA-1 until Mark Stevens, the same guy who figured out what had happened, proved that the flame malware had been constructed through a cryptographic attack. He came up with he found the collision for SHA-1, okay? And he did that in 2017. I actually think that would have happened a lot sooner if everyone hadn't been mining Bitcoins and focused on SHA-256, okay? Now, sometimes we ratchet up the strength of an algorithm because we feel that the amount of compute power an attacker may have available to them is increasing. And that's what we here at Microsoft did with RSA. We've shipped RSA, since NT4. But we were using default sizes of 10 24-bit RSA keys, and some of that was due to export controls in the US at that point in time. But we started banning keys less than 2048 bits in size. In 2009, NIST announced a transition for the government to use longer keys. Windows started blocking keys less than 1024 bits inside, and we sort of have just decreased for a particular key length our confidence in RSA. Now, in 2005, the NSA, that is the National Security Agency, not the nation-state level actor that I referenced earlier, they announced oh, you just got that. Good, okay. NSA announced something they called Suite B, which was a set of algorithms that they approved for up to top secret use, and that they wanted commercial entities to basically put into their products and services. And in fact, at that point in time, they told Microsoft that if we didn't put elliptic curve cryptography, which are the pieces of Suite B, into Vista, they weren't going to buy Vista. So we had a crash program to put that into Vista, and then to put it into our phones, and we're still, as we move up the stack, trying to get ECC still deployed everywhere. But they came out with this set of ciphers, and it was AES, and it was SHA-2, and it was ECC instead of RSA, a different public key algorithm. Now, in 2015, NSA, with no notice, updated their announcement on Suite B and basically said, if you haven't already moved to elliptic curve, well, maybe you want to save your dev cycles and put them into the future, because of course I can just take dev cycles from now and put them into the future. Because we're going to tell you to move to something that's quantum resistant. We're going to tell you to move to another algorithm. And that was actually slightly after my project started. In early 2015, I went to the quantum computing team here at Microsoft. Okay, now let's talk about why. This is because quantum's coming. That's what NSA basically said, quantum computers are coming and they're a threat. And you're going to have to do a transition. Okay? And in fact, we have known since 1994 that if you could ever build what we call a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, that's the fancy way of saying one that's big enough, okay, and stable enough. If you could build a quantum computer that had enough stability and logical qubits in it, we'll talk about that in a moment, we could factor in polynomial time. We could break the hard number theory problem underneath the RSA algorithm quickly. And we could actually do that for discrete log problems, which also underlie Diffie-Hellman, and we could do it for the elliptic curve variants of that, which we get used. And that's everything that we are currently using in common use today for public key algorithms. Okay? And so NSA said, we think this is coming. And in fact, in early 2015, we've had a quantum computing team here at Microsoft for a long time, and they're trying to build a quantum computer. There's other teams around the world trying to. And each team uses different physics. And I went to them in early 2015. I said, OK, when do you think we're going to get a quantum computer that's cryptographically relevant? And they told me, oh, 15 years. You got plenty of time. No, we don't have plenty of time. I'll show you in a moment why we don't have plenty of time. So let me talk a little bit about what a quantum computer is. They are computers that operate using the properties of quantum physics. I am not a physicist. I'm a cryptographer, so I'm not going to tell you how the physics works under the covers besides its spooky action at a distance. But here's the way to think about it. The logical element in the computers we use today are bits. In a quantum computer, they're called qubits. And the quantum bits basically can be both zeros and ones at the same time. They hold a superposition of states. Quantum bits can be entangled, and they can move in parallel even though they're separate bits. And you can effectively do a lot of operations in parallel. And what Peter Shor showed in 1994 was that you could use this property so that if you were trying to factor or to solve an important subproblem in factoring that lets you factor, you could construct things so that the qubits would constructively interfere on the right answer and destructively interfere on the wrong answers. So if you did a measurement, you got a spike for the right answer. And then Grover did a similar sort of algorithm in '96 for general search problems. And what this all basically lets you do is do certain things fast that we cannot do today fast with piles of Azure machines. Okay? Now I want to show you some pictures about where we are in the state of quantum computers. This is Charlie Marx's lab in Copenhagen, Denmark. He's one of the primary collaborators with our quantum computing team. I love putting pictures in from the physicists of what their equipment looks like because cryptographers have nothing like this. I mean, we have whiteboards, okay? So they get the really interesting equipment. And that white cylinder, that vertical cylinder over there on the left, that's what's called a dilution refrigerator. And at the bottom of that, it has successively colder stages. And at the bottom of that is one of the coldest places on Earth. And that's where the quantum realm is, and that's where they actually operate. So when you are way down at the bottom and you're looking at temperatures down there, it's hundredths of Kelvin above absolute zero. And that's where they look at the properties of the physical systems that they're looking at. Now, if you actually want to build, and this is what our folks in the quantum computing team are doing, you can't just get the quantum bits to go. You've got to build the entire stack. You've got to get the control systems that run at only super cold temperatures like 4 Kelvin. You've got to get a way to get data in and out of there. You've got to build all the control systems. You've got to build a programming language, and the quantum computing team is focused on that. You know, my worry is what happens when they're successful, okay? They do have the coolest toys, though. I got to give them that, okay? Literally the coolest toys. So if we look at something like RSA, traditionally, our crypto systems, our public key crypto systems, have been built off the basis of a small increase in the size of the secret components, creates an exponential increase in the work to break. So if I think that an attacker is getting close to having the capability to break a system that I'm interested in, I increase the key size a little bit. When I go from 1024-bit RSA to 2048-bit RSA, I increase the amount of work to break that by a lot. Puts it well out of range. And whether I'm looking at the amount of classical compute power I could throw after a system in 2003 or what I could throw after it today, that curve really doesn't change much, right? It's an exponential attack. It is outside of the realm of what I can do no matter how much compute I throw at it. Quantum changes that because it gives me a polynomial time. It's linear on the log-log scale. And it doesn't matter how many bits I've got. If I double the number of bits in my RSA components, in my RSA private key, I just double the number of qubits I need. So it scales linearly. So if I can build a big enough quantum computer and if it scales, I'm in trouble. Now, it turns out I'm not just in trouble for RSA. As I alluded to earlier, I'm in trouble for ECC, and I'm actually in trouble for symmetric ciphers and hash functions, but it's not as bad on there. This is a graph of if you take the most common cipher suite that gets used today for TLS, it's using elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman ephemeral for doing the key agreement. It's using RSA, say, for doing signatures to do server authentication. It uses Mike. Oh, I'm back. OK. So you get AES for doing the content encryption. I use SHA-256 as a hash function on it. Each of those components can be attacked more efficiently if your attacker has access to a quantum computer. For the public key components, it's catastrophic. For what happens with AES and SHA-2, I basically get a square root attack. A 128-bit AES key, which we believe in a classical realm has 2 to the 128 security, only has 2 to the 64 security if I have a quantum computer available to me. Same thing happens with the hash functions. So the response to quantum computers for symmetric cryptography is to double the key sizes, then I get back to the security levels that I was aiming for. But the response for the stuff on the left is different. Those algorithms no longer work. So we did some work with the quantum computing team to precisely analyze how many qubits you actually need. How big does the cryptographically relevant quantum computer need to be to attack the size we use today? And this is from a paper at Asiacrypt 2017 last year, where on the left-hand side is the number of qubits that you need based on the size of your elliptic curve to break running the variance of the algorithms we need, and on the right-hand side is for RSA. So if you look at, say, 3072-bit RSA, or let's take 2048-bit RSA, you need 4098 qubits. And you need a bunch of logical gates, too, but let's look at the qubit number, because that's the hard number. I need 4098 stable logical quantum bits. Today, we have maybe 70, and they're not stable. Okay, we have very few, not in our technology, but there are other groups with other technology that have on the order of 10s or 30s or 70s. When you read stories about it, you'll say, oh, we got to 75 qubits. We can now factor, 30 or something, or we can go factor something larger. We need a lot more qubits, okay? But what we're looking at is what's our ability to scale once we have sort of stable bits. And on the ECC side, it's actually a little bit simpler. I need fewer qubits for the same security level because the curve sizes are smaller. Now, remember when I went back and I went to the quantum computing team and I said, you're giving me 15 years? I said, great, this was early 2015. I got to worry about a quantum computer coming in 2030. And then I started doing the work back plan for how long does it take to effectively upgrade the internet from RSA and elliptic curve to some new or set of new public key algorithms by 2030, and I kind of was right on the edge of having enough time to do that. Because you think about everything you've got to do. You've got to research and come up with new algorithms. You've got to get them cryptanalyzed. You've got to get some standardization agreement. You've got to start rolling them out in prototypes. You've got to standardize protocols. You've got to deploy those in test environments. You've got to upgrade all the hardware you've got. And then you got to turn off the stuff you use that's going to be broken. Because if you don't do that, you get flame again. And when you think about the decommissioning, and then you look at how long it took Microsoft to get off of MD5, which is about 10 years. You look at how long it took us to get off of SHA-1. We're still trying to get rid of that in certain places. 15 years was not a lot of time. Now, so it's a future threat, but it's a threat to us today. And the reason that we're here talking about this is because the quantum computers that are coming are going to be a threat. Now, I should point out one other thing. We're not the only ones working on this. In response to the NSA announcement, NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, launched a competition, which you'll hear about a little bit more from Karen, in November of last year, to standardize new post-quantum algorithms for the US government, and hopefully they'll take them to ISO or somewhere else that's an international standards organization, and that'll become the new standard that everybody rallies around for public key cryptography, just like they did with AES and just like they did with SHA-3. But the thing that we got to worry about is that those quantum computers in the future are a threat to information that we are transmitting and storing today. Because if the security lifetime of the information that you are transmitting today extends beyond the point at which you think your adversary is going to have access to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, your adversary is going to siphon that data off. They're going to record now for exploit later. And you have to assume that that's going to happen. If your adversary has access to it, it's easy enough to store all the encrypted bits they care about, and they can break it later. So there's a threat today to encrypted data that we're sending, which is why we're starting to not only do all this work in the lab, but actually look at prototype deployments of quantum-resistant security channels, right? How can I add these algorithms in? And we're also looking at what happens on the authentication side. Because just like what happened with Flame, if your attacker can put a quantum computer against a classical public key digital signature key, they can break that and then impersonate you, and then you got to worry about things like authenticode and code signing and firmware updates to your hardware, et cetera. And every time we ship a system today that doesn't have an ability to update, like that smart light switch you're putting into the wall in your house that doesn't take updates without prying it out of the wall, we're creating a legacy problem for the future. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen. She's going to tell you about some of the algorithm stuff that we're working on today.
Thanks. So when we started work on this, we know that when we're doing new cryptography, you can't just do algorithms in a vacuum. So we began with working on algorithms and trying to apply those to protocols, starting with OpenSSL immediately. In the time since, we've also started talking about how these fit into systems. And we're going to just give you a quick overview of how where we are on each of those. Come on. Yep. So Brian mentioned the NIST competition. We have competition in quotes because technically it's not a competition. If NIST called it a competition, they'd have to use different rules. But they put this call out. Teams of cryptographers from around the world responded and put in proposals. Now, I want to pause on that. We are really happy that this was turned into such an international competition because we would love to see fewer national algorithms and have the result of this competition be something that is going to be used worldwide. Out of 69 submissions that made that November 30th finish line for the first round, 5 of them have already been knocked out. So what's going on right now is that NIST is doing analysis of everybody that was submitted for round 1 and looking at how they're going to narrow that down for round 2. In the meantime, cryptographers around the world and every single grad student in the universe is trying to either improve their own candidate or break somebody else's candidate or break your own candidate before somebody else does. So this is all kind of a fun thing that's going on. There are 4 candidates that were put into this competition by Microsoft. 3 of them that we were arguably a leader on, 1 which we were a participant on. And we'll give you a quick overview of each of those. One thing to note, no one really expects NIST to come out with a single standard out of this competition. We think there's going to be multiple, so the world's going to look a little different. So anything that we come up with as post-quantum crypto has to be secure against both the cryptographically relevant quantum computer, I got to practice saying that fast, as well as classical attackers. And when you look at what kinds of math problems could be used as the basis for this, they fall in certain families. And the dark blue ones are the ones where Microsoft has chosen to invest. The lighter blue ones are ones where we didn't. So I'll talk about the light blue ones briefly. Hash-based, most of them have state, which is kind of awkward. And also the key sizes are large. We just didn't see a lot of prospect there. For code-based and multivariate, there are already some people there. Keys are large. There's also some intuition from some cryptographers that those may not stand up to some hard cryptanalysis, so we'll see. The largest bucket by far is the lattice-based group. We have a candidate in that bucket. The smallest is isogeny. That's the bucket where there's only one, and that's us. And then there's the other category. So jumping straight into these. The first one that we started working on was an RLWE, ring learning with errors approach. And as we looked at that, we decided that while the idea was good, we wanted to get rid of that ring. Because the ring is algebraic structure that potentially adds surface that a attacker could go after. You see the list there of the team members in Frodo. I want to call attention to the presence of some Google researchers that were working with us on here. You may have noticed last summer, Google came out with an announcement that they had produced a experimental build of Chrome that was one of the first commercial products with post-quantum protection in it. Now, that was only available for a month or two. They pulled it for some reasons that were not their fault. They got a ton of great publicity for that, which burned us really hard, because if you read their blog post, they thanked us for our contributions. Do not want to see that happen again. So back to Frodo. So Frodo is lattice-based encryption. We got rid of the ring, ergo we called it Frodo. We got rid of the ring. This is a cryptographer's joke. Yeah. So the good news for Frodo is that lattices are a well-studied problem. This is something that cryptographers have been looking at for a long time, so we're pretty sure this thing's going to stand up. This is fast, but the key sizes are kind of big, and I'll show you some numbers on this in a second. Now, it's kind of fun to take a look at what these problems look like, because most of us have studied the basic cryptography at some point or another, and you kind of have a familiarity for how RSA works. Let me give you an introduction to Frodo. So picture this as me explaining Frodo with like little Lego toys or something like that. This is the very basic one. So if I were to give you the public matrix in blue and add the secret and then ignore the yellow for a moment and just give you green, an attacker can solve that pretty easily. That's just linear algebra. However, if I have the public matrix, I take my secret, and I add that little bit of noise and produce green. All of a sudden, I've created a problem that neither the classical nor, we believe, neither the classical nor the quantum attacker can solve. Now, this is a very simple explanation. Think of this as RSA with explanation of RSA with 2 digits. All of the NIST competitors have papers and optimized releases and reference releases available online. So if you are interested in this, you can read more about all of these approaches, but this was just a peek into it. I want to move on and talk about our second key encipherment candidate. This is psych, supersingular isogeny key encipherment. You'll also hear Brian and I potentially refer to this as supersingular isogeny Diffie-Hellman. It has to do with what we were doing in the submission, so just I'm not going to go into that. Just if you hear us say SID-H, we mean psych. So psych uses elliptic curves, which are something that we're all very familiar with, but it uses them in a very different way. It creates these isogeny graphs that it walks, and that's how the key encipherment is constructed. So the good news for psych is there's nobody else doing this. We're the only proposal. The bad news is this is a newer problem, and cryptographers believe that something is secure based upon years and years of cryptanalysis. So we got to see if this boy stands up, but we think it's going to. So the properties of this one are that the keys are small, but it's a little slower. So let's take a look at what I mean by that. So in this chart, we have our 2 candidates in the dark blue there in comparison to RSA and ECDH. We also threw New Hope into this graph. New Hope is the one that Google took advantage of that's an RLWE, so that's there for comparison. And when you look at this, you can see that Frodochem there, really fast, psych, a little slower, but then you can see also the difference in the key size and how that shows up in the amount of traffic. Now, all of these are preliminary results. We are still in active research on this. We are still pounding on these, and every time I check back with the guys, we've cut another 10% off of this in performance. So I fully expect these numbers to move. But one of the things to note about this is that when it comes to transitioning legacy systems from today's crypto to this new crypto, that this has the potential, no matter what NIST picks, to break the stack up and down. If you have assumptions in your code about key sizes, if you have assumptions in your code about how long something takes to compute, this, whatever comes out of the competition, could very well break that. That's one of the reasons we're very concerned about this transition. So let's move on quickly and talk about some of our 2 signature candidates. The first one is Q Tesla. This is the one where we did not lead. This was led by Nina Bindel and the team at Darmstadt. So they came to us and asked to use our RLWE scheme for a signature scheme. So this is based upon, strictly speaking, what's called decisional RLWE. And so again, this has that ring. We think it's secure. Time will tell. So this has very fast signing and verification. The key and signature sizes are a little larger than what you were using today, but it's not too far off. So this is a good, strong candidate. The last one I want to talk about is Picnic. This is one of my favorites. This one is, I don't want to say completely bonkers, but it's a very different approach. We were pursuing this, and then we found out that our some friends at Graz were also pursuing this line of research, so we bound together into one team. This is a signature scheme that's based upon zero knowledge proofs. So if you remember, zero knowledge proof is something where I prove that I know some secret without revealing anything else other than that I know that secret. So this takes that and mixes that with some symmetric key primitives that we know are going to stand up and creates a PQ signature scheme out of it. Now, the cool thing about Picnic is that we can prove that there's no number theoretic assumptions in this. This thing is going to stand up. There's always bad news. While it's got small keys, the signatures are a bit large. So let's take a look at that. So this is in comparison to RSA. And you can first see that those Q-Tesla lines, that's in comparison to RSA. Sign and verify, we're better. And the key sizes aren't too far off. Picnic, that signature size, kind of stands out a little bit. However, the Professor Jonathan Katz and some of his collaborators just came out with a paper that we're hoping to, assuming that he's correct, will allow us to cut that down to a third of that. So you should see these numbers moving, and that will really help Picnic. So it's not enough just to create these algorithms. We've got to see how these things work in the real-world protocols that are being used today, because this is sort of when you talk about the hash-based approaches. If it needs state, if it's going to break every single protocol we use, it's no good. We started on our own, but we quickly joined up with a group of like-minded folks in what's called the Open Quantum Safe project. This is being led by professors at the University of Waterloo and McMaster University. There's sort of two thrusts to this project. The first is liboqs, which is an abstraction layer that allows you to prototype with post-quantum crypto. And what's underneath, you don't have to worry about. You've got that abstraction layer, you call into the C, and you can play with any of the NIST post-quantum algorithms. So this is a cool thing. And we've integrated all 4 of our candidates into that. Yep, I went too far. There we go. So we have also done protocol integrations with this. Now, I can't remember if Brian talked much about hybrid. I think he mentioned it. So as we migrate from where we are now to where we want to be, it's very likely there's going to be a period where we'll use both classical cryptography, stuff that's FIPS approved, so you still have all the regulatory compliance that you need, and then mix that with some extra post-quantum protection. And that'll be a good solution during the standards process. So for all these protocol releases, we have versions that are both hybrid, and then we have versions that are both plain post-quantum. Not ready for prime time yet, but great for experimentation. So there's builds of OpenSSL, TLS 1.2 and 1.3, as well as OpenSSH. And these are, we'll have these links at the very end if you want to get all of the download links. I want to talk a little more about the work that our team did on OpenVPN. When we think about the migration of all of our systems from where we are today to post-quantum, there's a real problem for what are we going to do during that transition while things are developing. And so one of the things we looked at was, well, let's look at creating a VPN that's post-quantum protected so that while you're updating your legacy app, you can use this tunnel. So we've created a version of OpenVPN that is post-quantum enabled. You have a client on your Windows PC, and what that does is create a post-quantum protected channel up to your Azure server. And we've used the DNS leak test to kind of verify that this works. So this is code that's released that you can play with. During the development, Greg Zavarucha on our team had an idea, which is, hey, we could use a Raspberry Pi and effectively create a cool little appliance so that you can create that tunnel and plug Windows clients or any client into it. And any client using this then has that post-quantum protected tunnel up to your cloud host. There's no software needed on the cloud. We have builds of Linux that run on a Raspberry Pi that you can download if you want to create your own version of this. I have to admit that we put that photo on this slide for bait for this audience. Yeah, that's not the password anymore. So the last kind of a work stream that we've got going here is on systems. When we think about all the infrastructure at Microsoft that either protects our data or our customers' data, there's a lot of stuff we've got to do. Now, we started looking at our PKI infrastructure, and that's what I want to tell you about a little bit more. We did some fun work with Utamako to try putting post-quantum algorithms on an HSM. And so we used their HSM simulator first, got Picnic implemented onto that, and then we moved it over and got this working on the HSM itself. We wanted to demonstrate that we could do 3 different core PK operations, doing a sort of a normal CA operation, doing an operation with end entities keys, and also making sure that we could use this post-quantum crypto with a client who's bringing us an RSA key. So this was a successful experiment. We have demos of this that we've done, so we know that this works. We'll probably come back and revisit this as we continue to develop these algorithms. I'm just going to put this up here for a second. This is one of our asks of you, is that we have everything we've been doing, we have released publicly. That's an important part of the NIST project. It's an important part of what we're doing. We want to make sure that people can see what's going, that these conversations are happening out in public, and that all this code is available for people to experiment with now. So please, I would encourage you to download, experiment with this, get your hands dirty, and talk to us. We'll have our aliases at the end here, and tell us what you find. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Brian.
Okay. All right, so I got a few minutes left. I want to try to talk about where we go from here and give you a feel for both what your core takeaway should be. If I was giving this as an Ignite, it would be what would the call for action to be, et cetera. What do I want you to take away from this day? 1, we believe quantum computers are coming. We don't know exactly when, but frankly, it doesn't matter exactly when, unless they come in 5 years, in which case we're all screwed, okay? Because we'll never get updated in time. But let's say we're looking 10 to 15 years or more. You got to be cognizant of the fact that that threat is coming, because the work you're doing today in developing new systems, in deploying things, needs to take the fact that there's going to be at least 1 algorithm transition and probably 2 or 3 into account. Let me harp on Karen's point about hybrid. Because all of these post-quantum algorithms are relatively new and have not had the decades of study that RSA and elliptic curve have had, we don't really feel comfortable just jumping from RSA directly to a post-quantum algorithm. Even if it comes out of the NIST competition, NIST blesses it and it goes through. What we will most likely do is go in this hybrid mode where, for my rough estimate, is a period of 10 years. We would deploy both a classical alg and a post-quantum alg in parallel. Now, if I'm talking about setting up an encrypted channel with something like TLS or IPsec or something like that, what that means practically is I'm going to do 2 key agreements in parallel, one with, say, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, one with a post-quantum scheme, derive 2 shared keys, then mix those to get the key that I'm going to use for my content encryption for my channel. As a practical matter, based on our performance estimates with even the code we've got today, that's not going to add that much overhead. It will add some overhead, okay? But it will be relatively transparent to the user, especially when you take network latencies into account and things like that, okay? But that's probably the first transition. And then at some point, when we have enough confidence in the post-quantum, we'll do another transition that takes that algorithm away. And if you want to be really bleeding edge, you do 3 transitions. You start transitioning now to one of the algorithms that you pick that's out there. I would vote for one of ours, but I'll let that be up to you. We have plenty of open source code and resources to sort of support prototype experiments with our code base. Then NIST is going to choose something. Obviously, we hope we're one of the ones that are selected. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. There's a transition there. There's a potential third transition. But if you make your systems cryptographically agile, and I know any of you who have come into Crypto Board, we have harped on this and pounded into you to make your systems cryptographically agile. And I know we usually get the, yeah, we'll do it in the next release, okay? It's really important that you have configurability in your algorithm choices, or that you're using protocols that have that, because we're going to hit multiple transitions here, and these are going to be worse, or how do you say, more impactful than going from MD5 to SHA-1 or SHA-1 to SHA-2 or changing the key bits in RSA. These algorithms have different characteristics. And for example, you may have somewhere in your code base an implicit assumption in some data structure that your public keys are never more than 4096 bits inside, because who needs more than 4096-bit RSA? And that breaks if you put a lattice scheme in. So testing software stacks early to find places where we have made implicit assumptions about the behavior of the algorithms is really important. So you got to start planning that transition now, and you got to start thinking about that now. Now, the hybrid on key exchange is a little bit easier. When we talk about digital signatures, there isn't really a hybrid signature. What you end up doing is doing two signatures in parallel and validating both of them. Now, we actually already do some of this in Authenticode because we have to support RSA SHA-1 signatures on down-level platforms still. Things that are still within super-duper extended technical support, and RSA SHA-2. And when we start rolling out support for ECC signatures and other sorts of things like that, and eventually post-quantum, we'll end up checking multiple signatures. If you are using public key digital signatures for doing authentication of your own software or of your own systems, think about how you're going to have to do an and of a couple signatures, because that's going to be the hybrid mode. It's not going to be enough to just flip, okay? And start building that in now. All that being said, if you wanted to deploy something today, if somebody comes to me and says, Brian, it turns out that some nation-state level actor happens to have a 10,000 qubit quantum computer today and all our stuff's at risk, yes, we have stuff we could deploy today. We'd love to have more bake time on everything, but if you tell me to put something in, I can deploy it today. And there's practical options that they have good enough performance characteristics. And that's true among a lot of the candidates within the NIST competition. And finally, we may already be late for the transition. Because encrypted data may have security lifetimes well beyond that's being recorded and siphoned off today, that's going to be beyond practical access to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, the information you're sending today may already be vulnerable, depending on that. Okay? If somebody wants to read my emails in 20 years, I guess they're going to be able to do that, because I'm using TLS to protect all my channels between my mail servers and everything else, and that's what I got. But also the stuff we're putting into our critical infrastructure, those devices may have long lifetimes. And again, it's not, it's the light switch in the wall, and it's the other sorts of things where we assume that the device doesn't necessarily have an update path, or the update path is particularly difficult, that we're going to have to, and I consider ripping something out of the wall particularly difficult. And that's what we got to really think about when we're deploying things today. Now, I thought for this audience, I'd talk a little bit more, add a little bit of content about tools. A lot of you do analysis tools. A lot of you are looking at what the bad guys are doing. So let's put ourselves in that frame of mind for a second, okay? The NIST competition, as Karen said, 69 submissions. Okay, 5 of them were broken pretty quickly, so 64 real ones. They're going to whittle that down sometime this spring. We don't know how many, but let's say we got on the order of 25 or so. They've all got good open source implementations. It's easy enough to consume that code. Assume that some of the bad guys are going to start consuming code. Okay? What does that mean from an analysis perspective? Well, if you're looking at some protocol like TLS, you may start to see some algorithm IDs that you don't recognize. Somebody may start doing something weird. I'm sure someone's going to be out there thinking that oh, I can use some algorithm nobody's going to know about, and I'll hide from them. Okay, they're not going to hide. Okay, but it's going to be just a different algorithm, and that's something to think about. And so your tools themselves have to be a little bit more agile in looking at things. You're not going to just see RSA and elliptic curve and AES out there. You may see some more public key algorithms. So think about that, and that's also true for digital signatures, and that's true for when you're analyzing command and control channels and stuff like that. You might sort of think, I'm not even going to get into blockchains. I don't want to talk about blockchains. I hate talking about blockchains. Yes, there are post-quantum blockchains. Let's set that aside. But let's think about the analysis of what bad guys might be doing. That code's going to be available, and it's relatively easy to consume. And of course, as part of our own work, we're making it easy to consume, so assume that's going to happen as well. Finally, once NIST chooses algorithms, And the timeline on NIST is a little iffy. Originally, they said they were going to be done with this competition by 2023, and there would be 3 rounds of analysis, and we're in round 1, and we expect round 2 to kick off over the summer of 2019. Now they've pulled back, and they've said, well, we know there's a round 2, but we're not sure there's a round 3. So we expect them, again, to pick some small number of algorithms. I am really hoping they pick no more than 2 or 3 on the signature and 2 or 3 on the encryption side. If they pick more than that, we're going to have to implement all of them, and we're not going to get a lot of interoperability. And I don't think they're going to pick one because, again, there's too many different families. And I think they're going to want to hedge their bets to 2 because not all, this isn't a one-size-fits-all sort of algorithm situation. Again, with the trade-offs you've got among different families and different sets of problems, different post-quantum schemes are better for different scenarios. And you want to think about matching your scenario to your matching your algorithm to your scenario. But once NIST basically picks whatever they pick, we're going to see churn in all the public protocols and all the standards. Right? The IETF is basically waiting for NIST to pick algorithms before they standardize those algorithms, then enroll TLS 1.3 and IPsec and X509 and everything else. And you're going to see a whole bunch of churn that will happen in the standards realm as we update, and then we'll see the transition and the rollout. Hopefully, we'll start playing with things before then. Finally, I do get asked a question that I feel I got to answer. How will we know when an adversary has a sufficiently large quantum computer? What's the canary in the coal mine? And the answer is there probably isn't one. And what I would point you back to is what happened with the Enigma in World War II. Right? Polish mathematicians delivering information to the British. We all know the story of Turing and the folks at Bletchley Park and how hard they worked to keep the fact that they had broken the Enigma secret, doing parallel reconstruction of facts before it got used by the military. If a nation-state level adversary gets access to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, they're going to do everything they can to hide that fact, because we're going to have to deduce it. Now, if physicists, if some develop a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, they're going to publish that fact, they're going to get papers, they're going to get awards, and we'll all know. Just like if a mathematician, figures out how to factor in polynomial time and shows p equals np, right? They're going to go get an award for that, and they're going to put a paper out. But if an adversary, if somebody at a nation-state level adversary, or if organized crime or something like that decides to do it, then the issue is going to be we're going to have to deduce from signals, just like we did with Flame. Right? Nobody told us they had carried out a cache collision attack. We were able to deduce it from the evidence that we could see, and that's kind of what's going to happen here. There isn't going to be some sort of easy signal. We're going to have to start looking at things. And with that, I got a couple minutes left for questions. I will leave this slide up with Karen and my email address on it, and URLs if you want to go download code, and I'm happy to answer your questions. We all both are. And thank you very much for listening. And I know I'm standing between you and food, okay, so I'll try to be quick.
Brian, Karen, thank you very much for a great talk today. We have a lot of automation to catch things like dependencies in code for weak TLS usage. Like there's very specific things you can automate for to catch that kind of stuff. I was wondering if there are any common culprits that we could automate for to catch these kinds of issues for the move to post-quantum cryptography.
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, what can we look for in terms of automation to try to catch places where we got problems? That's a good question, and it kind of depends on where you are in the software stack. So here's what I see. Look, we have had agility at the lowest levels of Windows, right? Crypto API was pluggable from the mid-90s. But this is going to be Baal's law of cryptographic agility, right? The higher you move in the software stack, the harder it is to maintain that agility, because everything in between's got to maintain the agility and has the propagate and propagate settings and things like that. If you're talking at the highest level, like rights management services in Office, for you to be able to have agility with all your algorithms there, everything in between that you depend upon's got to have it. I would start to look at so what I tell customers who come in, I did an EBC on this yesterday. I said first thing you got to do is be able to understand where you're using crypto and what crypto you're using. So to the extent that you can automate the calls into standard libraries and what sizes and what algorithms are and collect the inventory, that helps a lot, okay? You can also try to look at fixed buffer sizes and things like that, where anything related to the crypto code that's being used, looking at how keys are being stored, the fields, call stuff like that, how are they being called? That would be the sorts of stuff that I would look at. If I'm dependent upon a protocol, the real question is the protocol itself agile, right? And do you have a way to pass the configuration information into that? So a thing to look for would be, well, you're calling crypt-acquire context in crypto API, but you're always specifying a fixed string that happens to hold, which CSP you're asking for, or the equivalent in CNG and that sort of thing, where I don't have some path in to pass some variable to choose some new algorithm, right? You could actually look for that, right? Places where we have tied things down might be a flag for where something's got to get looked at. That would be what comes to mind initially, be stuff like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really interesting question.
We got
question over here.
One more question over there.
Hi. So one of the limiting factors right now is the temperature required to do the quantum computing.
Correct.
So the question I have is, when do we see quantum computing at normal temperature or at a temperature that's easily feasible?
Okay.
So you're asking, when are you going to get that quantum laptop?
Well, it's not more than that. It's more that when will, right now this is basically limited to nation states or large organizations. When will smaller organizations or, let's say, the average large business have the ability to crack this crypto?
Well, so first, let me channel our quantum computing team. Okay, if they were here, what they would tell you is that their way of thinking about quantum computers is that these are facilities that we put into data centers that we make available as services on Azure, just like all the other services on Azure, and that you do need the physical plant to run at least the quantum realm of it at super cold temperatures, and that the way they see these scaling is that they're going to be big environments, and it's not going to be the sort of thing that I go install in every local store down the street, but that I access through the cloud.
Yeah, but it is going to be a service that you can get
But
to.
it would be a service that
Yeah.
you could get to and presumably somebody could get hold of. Well, when we make it available and when other people make it available, that's the issue. I should point out, your temperature argument, there is an important point, which is that it kind of gets glossed over that you have to be able to move data from room temperature classical computing down to this super cold quantum realm. And there is work that's being done on sort of cold classical, how you got to do that transition. That's understood to be another engineering problem. But I don't think you're going to get the equivalent of, at least on the physics today, of things running room temperature with the sorts of things we're looking at. But it's more like, how do we make it available as a service in a super cold environment? Okay, thanks. I think that's all the time we've got. So,
Thank you again, Karen and Brian.
Thank you.